There is a particular kind of exhaustion that has nothing to do with how much you slept last night. It is not the exhaustion of running a marathon or pulling a double shift. It is quieter than that, and in many ways far more destructive. It lives in the chest, a low hum of dread that wakes you at 3 a.m. with thoughts that loop and spiral and refuse to land anywhere useful. It is the exhaustion of worrying, and if you are honest with yourself, you know exactly what I mean. It is the project at work that might not land the way you hoped. Maybe it is the bill that is due before the money arrives. Maybe it is a relationship that feels like it is slowly coming apart at the seams, and you cannot tell whether you are imagining it or watching it happen in slow motion. Maybe it is something larger, the way the world seems to be reorganizing itself at a speed that no one asked for, with automation and artificial intelligence quietly reshaping entire industries, and somewhere in the back of your mind you are asking whether there will still be a place for you in it. Whatever the source, worry is costing you something that no amount of money can buy back. The present moment, the irreplaceable, once-only, never-returning present moment. And here is what makes this so tragic. Worry almost never solves the thing you are worrying about. It just burns the time and energy you would need to actually address it. Dale Carnegie understood this. He understood it not as a philosopher in an ivory tower, but as a man who had lived through failure, financial ruin, and the kind of gnawing anxiety that he once described as nearly driving him to the edge. In 1948, he published How to Stop Worrying and Start Living, and it has never gone out of print because the problem it addresses has never gone away. If anything, in an age of 24-hour news cycles, social media comparison spirals, economic uncertainty, and the unrelenting pace of a world that never powers down, Carnegie's insights are more urgent now than they were the day he wrote them. This is not a summary of that book. A summary would give you the skeleton without the muscle. What follows is something different. It is an immersive exploration of 6 lessons from Carnegie's work, lessons you can apply not someday, not after you've had time to think it over, but this week, starting today. Because the cost of waiting is not neutral. Every day you spend trapped in chronic worry is a day you do not get to spend actually living, and that, when you finally look back on it, is the deepest loss of all. The first lesson: shut the iron doors on yesterday and tomorrow. Carnegie opens his book with what sounds, at first, like impossibly simple advice. He asks you to live in daytime compartments. He borrowed the image from a speech by the great physician Sir William Osler, who told a group of students that the secret to a meaningful, productive life was to shut out the past and the future, and live fully in what he called the daytime compartment, the present 24 hours. Now, before you dismiss this as the kind of motivational platitude that looks great on a coffee mug but dissolves the moment real life shows up, stay with me, because there is something neurologically precise happening in this idea that Carnegie intuited long before modern brain science could confirm it. With a human mind, left to its own devices, is a time machine with a broken dial. It defaults to one of 2 positions: replaying the past or rehearsing the future. Both are forms of suffering. When we replay the past, we call it guilt, regret, grief, or resentment. When we rehearse the future, we call it anxiety, worry, dread, or fear. Neither activity, and this is critical, gives us any useful data about what to do right now. They just consume bandwidth. Think about how this shows up in the modern context. A freelance designer loses a major client and spends the next 2 weeks mentally litigating every conversation they had with that client, trying to figure out where things went wrong, replaying emails, second-guessing pitches. Meanwhile, their portfolio sits untouched. New proposals go unsent. The very time that could be spent rebuilding is swallowed entirely by rehashing what cannot be changed. Or consider the entrepreneur who is so consumed with imagining all the ways their startup could fail, competitors who might undercut them, economic downturns that might dry up funding, technology shifts that might make their product obsolete, that they cannot execute the one thing that actually matters today. Talking to customers, Carnegie's instruction is not to pretend the past did not happen or that the future does not exist. It is to recognize that you can only ever act in the present. The past is fixed, the future is unwritten. This moment, the one you are in right now, is the only moment where any change is actually possible. And when you learn to concentrate your full attention and energy here, something remarkable occurs. Problems that seemed enormous from a distance become manageable up close. Anxiety loses its grip because anxiety is almost always about something that has not happened yet, and you have just committed to dealing with what is actually in front of you. A practical way to apply this immediately. At the start of each day this week, write down one sentence that answers this question. What is the single most important thing I can actually do today? Not this year, not this month, today, and then spend the first 90 minutes of your day doing only that thing. You will find that the act of concentrating on a single present-day action does more to dissolve anxiety than any amount of positive thinking. The second lesson: use the magic formula for dissolving worry. Carnegie was deeply practical. He did not believe in vague reassurances. He believed in process. And one of the most powerful processes he described came from a man named Willis Carrier, the engineer who invented modern air conditioning. who developed a three-step technique for managing crisis situations that Carnegie called the magic formula. The formula works like this. When you are gripped by a worry, you ask yourself 3 questions in sequence. First, what is the worst that could possibly happen if this situation goes badly? Not the likely outcome, the worst conceivable outcome. Second, can you accept that worst-case scenario if it actually came to pass? Could you survive it? Could you find a way forward even then? Third, what can you do right now to improve upon that worst-case scenario and make a better outcome more likely? The reason this formula is so powerful is that it forces the mind to do something it almost never does spontaneously when it is worried. It forces the mind to complete the thought. Chronic worry is an incomplete thought. You begin a sentence, "What if I lose my job?" and your mind refuses to finish it because finishing it feels too terrifying. So the thought just circles, unresolved, burning energy without producing any information. Carrier's formula insists that you finish the sentence. What if I lose my job? The worst case is that I exhaust my savings in 4 months, have to move to a smaller place, and start over in a different role or industry. Can I accept that? Yes, it would be hard, but I would survive it. Now, what can I do today to make that worst case less likely or less severe? The moment you fully face the worst outcome and consciously accept it, something unexpected happens. The panic recedes, not because the problem went away, but because you have taken the uncertainty out of it. And uncertainty is the primary ingredient. In anxiety, when you know what you are dealing with, even if what you are dealing with is genuinely difficult, your mind shifts from panic mode to problem-solving mode. This is especially relevant in the current economic climate, with layoffs rippling through the tech sector, with AI tools automating tasks that used to be full-time roles, with entire categories of work being disrupted inside of a single decade. Many people are carrying a background hum of professional anxiety that they cannot quite articulate. The Carrier formula is a way to articulate it. Sit down with a piece of paper. Write out the worst-case scenario for your specific professional fear, not in vague terms, but in concrete, specific terms. Write out whether you could survive it. And then write out 3 concrete actions you could take this week to reduce the likelihood of that outcome. You will find that the act of writing turns an amorphous cloud of dread into a list of actionable problems, and actionable problems are the only kind you can actually do anything about. The third lesson: break the worry habit before it breaks. Carnegie was one of the first popular writers to name worry as a habit, not a rational response to real circumstances, but a neurological pattern that, if left unchecked, becomes the brain's default mode of operation. He was right, and modern neuroscience has since confirmed it in remarkable detail. The brain literally creates physical pathways for its most frequently repeated patterns of thought. The more you worry, the more efficient the brain becomes at worrying. The more skilled at it, the more automatic. This is why chronic worriers often cannot explain what they are worried about. They do not need a specific source. The habit has become sustaining. They wake up anxious before they have processed a single thought. Their body is in low-grade fight or flight before their eyes are fully open. And every new stimulus, a notification, a piece of bad news, an ambiguous email from a manager gets fed directly into the worry machine. Breaking this habit requires what Carnegie called keeping busy. He meant something more specific than just filling your schedule with tasks. He meant the deliberate act of flooding your conscious mind with a demanding present-tense activity, so thoroughly that the worry machine runs out of bandwidth to operate. He cited example after example of people who conquered devastating grief, loss, and trauma, not by processing it endlessly, but by throwing themselves so completely into useful work that their minds simply did not have the idle cycles to sustain the spiral. In modern terms, we can refine this further. The key is not just busyness, but engaged busyness, work that requires genuine cognitive attention. Scrolling your phone is not the answer. Your hands might be occupied, but your mind is not. The worry machine runs perfectly well in the background while you scroll. What actually interrupts it is a task that requires your full attention. Writing something, building something, having a real conversation, solving a problem. Flow states, those periods of deep engagement where time seems to disappear, are neurologically incompatible with anxiety. You cannot be in flow and simultaneously be worried. They do not coexist. For the person navigating the modern freelance economy, or running a side business, or trying to build something new alongside a full-time job, this lesson cuts both ways. On one hand, the engagement of meaningful work is one. What are the most effective anti-anxiety tools available? On the other hand, the constant connectivity that modern work demands, the always-on email, the Slack notifications at 10 p.m. The pressure to be perpetually responsive creates the worst possible conditions for worry, because it fragments attention without ever offering the depth of engagement that actually quiets the mind. One of the most powerful things you can do this week is to schedule one uninterrupted 90-minute block each day where you do one piece of deep work with every notification turned off. You will find that block of time does more to stabilize your mental state than almost anything else you can add to your routine. The fourth lesson: The law of large numbers and the folly of anticipating trouble. Carnegie devoted considerable attention to a phenomenon that we might today call probability blindness, the tendency to assign enormous emotional weight to outcomes that are statistically unlikely. He cited a study suggesting that roughly 85% of the things people worry about never actually happen. Of the 15% that do occur, the vast majority turn out to be far more manageable than anticipated. In other words, the cost of worry is almost always disproportionate to its actual value as a preparation tool. This does not mean that all worry is irrational. There is such a thing as productive concern, the kind that mobilizes action, leads to preparation, and then dissolves once that preparation is complete. If you notice the brakes in your car feel soft and you begin to worry about it, that worry has done its job the moment you schedule a service appointment. After that, continuing to worry about your brakes is pure waste. The concern has been converted into action. The action is in motion. There is nothing left for the worry to do. The problem is that most people never make that distinction. They allow productive concern to slide into chronic rumination, and they keep worrying long after the worry has outlived any useful function. Carnegie's instruction is to ask yourself, at any moment of anxiety, a simple diagnostic question. Is there any action I can take right now, today, that would address this concern? If yes, take that action, and then consciously let the worry go. If no, then you are worrying about something you cannot control, and the only rational response is to redirect your attention to something you can in the context of the AI economy. This distinction is urgently relevant. Millions of people are currently spending enormous cognitive and emotional energy worrying about whether their job will be automated. Some of that worry is useful. It may motivate them to learn new skills, to develop capabilities that are difficult to automate, to build relationships and reputation that technology cannot replicate. But the worry that does not produce any of those actions is pure loss. It does not slow the pace of technological change. It does not make anyone more employable. Just depletes the very energy and creativity that would be most useful in navigating a world of change. The antidote is specificity. Vague worry about AI taking jobs is not actionable. But I am going to spend 4 hours this week learning how to use AI tools to make my own work faster and more valuable is extremely actionable. The first response to technological anxiety is always the same. Convert the fear into a concrete, skill-building action, and then execute that action. You cannot worry your way into relevance. You can only work your way there. The fifth lesson, stop trying to get even. The poison of resentment here is the lesson from Carnegie that almost no one expects to find in a book about worry, and yet it is perhaps the one that liberates people most completely. He dedicates a significant portion of his book to the destructive psychology of resentment, the act of holding on to grievances against people who have wronged you, and he argues, with compelling logic, that resentment is one of the most potent sources of chronic worry and inner turmoil available to human beings. His argument is not primarily moral. He is not saying you should forgive people because forgiveness is virtuous. He is saying something more pragmatic. Resentment destroys the person who carries it. He quotes the philosopher Epictetus, who pointed out that what disturbs us is not what other people do to us, but our own thoughts about what they have done to us. He cites example after example of people who've spent years, in some cases decades, nursing grudges against people who had long since moved on, who were not affected in any meaningful way by the resentment directed at them, while the person doing the resenting suffered every single day. The modern landscape is full of resentment triggers. A colleague who took credit for your work, a boss who overlooked you for a promotion you deserved, a business partner who betrayed your trust, a platform that suppressed your content, a market that did not reward the effort you put in. Social media has turbocharged resentment by making comparison effortless and giving everyone a front row seat to every success that others enjoy, while your own struggles remain invisible to you. This is a formula for chronic grievance, and chronic grievance is exhausting. Carnegie's prescription is not passive. He is not telling you to smile and pretend the injustice did not happen. He is telling you to make a cold-eyed calculation about where your energy goes. Every hour you spend rehearsing the ways someone wronged you is an hour you are not spending building something, improving something, creating something. The person who wronged you is probably not lying awake at night consumed by guilt. You are the one lying awake. You are the one paying the price. That is not justice. That is self-inflicted injury. The practice he recommends is almost counterintuitive. Try to understand the perspective of the person who wronged you, not to excuse them, not to absolve them, but to understand them well enough that their behavior becomes comprehensible. And comprehensible behavior loses the power to haunt you. When someone acts in a way that harms you, they are almost always operating from their own fear, their own insecurity, their own misguided self. That does not make it acceptable, but it makes it human. And human behavior, once understood, stops feeling like a cosmic injustice directed specifically at you. The practical step for this week: identify one grievance you are currently carrying, a person, a situation, an institution, and spend 20 minutes writing about it from that other party's perspective. What were they afraid of? What did they need that they were not getting? What might their version of events look like? You do not have to agree with their version. You do not have to forgive them in any formal sense. But you will find that the act of imagining their perspective reduces the emotional intensity of the grievance significantly. And reduced intensity means more energy available for the life you are actually trying to build. The sixth lesson: count your blessings, not your troubles. The radical act of gratitude. Carnegie's final major prescription is one that sounds, to the modern ear, deeply unfashionable. Gratitude, counting your blessings. We have heard these phrases so many times that they have worn smooth, like river stones, and lost their edge. But the underlying mechanism Carnegie was pointing to is not soft or sentimental. It is a hard cognitive fact about how the human mind allocates attention. The mind cannot hold two emotional states of equal intensity simultaneously. You cannot be fully consumed by fear and fully consumed by appreciation at the same moment. This is not philosophy, it is neurology. The attentional and emotional systems of the brain are competitive. What you deliberately place your attention on grows stronger. What you habitually ignore grows weaker. This is why gratitude practices, when done with genuine specificity and regularity, have a measurable impact on anxiety levels that multiple peer-reviewed studies have now confirmed. Carnegie was describing this mechanism 70 years before. The research caught up with him. But here is the mistake people make with gratitude. They practice it vaguely. They write in a journal that they are grateful for their health, their family, their home. These are real blessings, but because they are named so generally, they produce only a faint flicker of genuine feeling. The brain is not moved by abstractions. It is moved by specifics. Compare. I am grateful for my family too. I am grateful that my daughter, without being asked, made me a cup of tea this morning and left it on my desk because she knew I was stressed. The second one lands differently. It lands because it is particular, because it is real, because the specificity of it forces the mind to actually inhabit the memory rather than gesture at a category. The version of gratitude Carnegie was advocating for is the version where you stop periodically in the middle of a genuinely difficult life and deliberately, consciously, specifically name what is still working, what is still intact, what if it were taken from you tomorrow, you would give almost anything to have back. Done with that level of intention, gratitude is not a soft emotion, it is a survival tool. It is what keeps you functional and oriented toward action during periods when circumstances are genuinely difficult. In the context of a turbulent economy, this practice has specific and practical power. The freelancer who is not landing clients as quickly as they hoped can either spend their mental energy cataloging everything that is going wrong, the invoices that have not been paid, the proposals that went unanswered, the savings account that is lower than it should be, or they can spend a portion of each day specifically naming what is still operational, skills they have developed, relationships that are intact, small wins that happen this week, capacity they have built. The first orientation produces paralysis. The second produces the kind of grounded confidence that actually makes the next. Sales core go better. Carnegie would tell you that you have almost certainly been conditioned by media, by social comparison, and by the negativity bias that is built into human cognition to notice what is missing far more readily than what is present. The radical act, and in today's environment it is genuinely radical, is to reverse that conditioning deliberately. To train your attention back toward abundance, not as a denial of real problems, but as a counterweight to the distorted picture that anxiety and media and comparison create. This week, each morning, before you look at your phone, before you check your messages or your notifications or your newsfeed, write down 3 specific things you are grateful for. No categories. Specific things, specific moments, specific people, specific capabilities. Do this for 7 days and notice what happens to the quality of your first hour each morning. The thread that runs through all 6 lessons. If you step back and look at these 6 lessons together, you will notice something. They are not 6 separate techniques. They are 6 different angles on a single underlying insight that Carnegie spent his life trying to communicate. Almost all human suffering that is not caused by physical pain is caused by the stories we tell ourselves about our circumstances. Not the circumstances themselves, the stories. The person who lives in daylight compartments is choosing to tell a story about today rather than a story about all the possible futures in which things go wrong. The person who applies the carrier formula is choosing to tell a specific empty story about the worst case rather than an open-ended story about undefined catastrophe. The person who breaks the worry habit through engaged work is choosing to tell a story about what they are building rather than a story about what they might lose. The person who stops nursing resentments is choosing to tell a story about where they are going rather than a story about where they have been wronged. And the person who practices specific gratitude is choosing to tell a story about what is present rather than what is absent. None of this is about toxic positivity. None of it is about pretending that hard things are not hard. Carnegie was too pragmatic for that, and life is too complicated. The lessons he teaches assume real difficulty. They assume loss and setback and injustice and uncertainty. They just insist that the story you tell about those realities is a choice, maybe the most consequential choice you make each day. The closing reflection. The cost of waiting here is what I want you to sit with as this audio comes to a close. Every insight in this script is available to you right now, not next week, nor after you have dealt with the current crisis, nor after things calm down. Right now. The day-tight compartment begins the moment you decide it does. The carrier formula works the moment you pick up a pen. The gratitude practice begins tomorrow morning, before you reach for your phone. The question is not whether these tools work. The evidence for their effectiveness spans more than 7 decades of documented human experience. The question is whether you will use them. And the honest answer, the one that Carnegie spent his career trying to change, is that most people will not. Not because they are lazy or undisciplined, but because the pull of familiar patterns is enormously strong. The worry habit is comfortable in its own way. It feels like preparation. It feels like responsibility. It feels like taking things seriously. It has been with you so long that a life without it feels, if you are honest, slightly difficult to imagine that, but consider the alternative. Consider what you are trading for that habit. You are trading the texture of your daily life, the capacity to be fully present with the people you love, the creative energy that could go into work that actually matters to you, the confidence that comes from knowing you can handle difficulty without being consumed by anticipating it, the simple, underrated, irreplaceable pleasure of a morning where the first thought in your mind is possibility rather than dread. Carnegie published this book because he had seen, over decades of teaching and studying human behavior, that the people who mastered worry were not the people who had easier lives. They were not wealthier or luckier or more talented. They were people who had made a decision, a real, committed, daily decision to refuse to let tomorrow's imagined disasters steal today's actual experience. You are going to face uncertainty this week. You are going to face challenges that do not have clean solutions, situations where you cannot control the outcome, moments where the future feels genuinely unclear. That is not a prediction. That is just the condition of being alive in a complex world and a turbulent moment in history. The only question worth asking is not whether difficulty will arrive. It is what you will do with your mind while it does. The worst outcome is not the thing you are currently worrying about. The worst outcome is arriving at the end of a life that was full of possibility and discovering that you spent most of it worried about possibilities that never came to pass, grieving losses that had already happened, and preparing for futures that never arrived while their actual present, with all its imperfect, irreplaceable richness, passed by untouched. In UNLIVED. Carnegie called his book How to Stop Worrying and Start Living because he understood that those are not two separate activities. Stopping the first is how you begin the second. You cannot do both at once. You are always choosing one or the other, and every day, every hour, every morning when you open your eyes, you get to choose again. Choose well. Choose deliberately. Choose the present. The life you have been waiting to live is already here.